Good morning, everybody. Here we are, back in the classroom. It's very lonely without you guys. I know I've said that before, but I mean it. I miss teaching you. It's just not the same. Having a conversation with myself through my phone with you guys. I can't hear you talk back to me. So talk loud so that I can hear you. All right, so Fablehaven, Chapter 8 is called Shadow Man. That sounds a little bit creepy, not gonna lie. So remember, we have two different stories going on right now. So Kendra is at Las Mesa in Arizona with Warren on a mission to try and find the artifact on that preserve. And Seth is back at Fablehaven. So we are back with Seth right now. Seth squeezed toothpaste onto his brush and started scrubbing his teeth. He hardly saw his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Things at Fablehaven were getting so intense he had almost stopped envying Kendra for being away. Almost. He still sometimes pictured her and Warren rappelling into an Egyptian tomb, mowing down mummies and cobras with machine guns. An adventure that awesome would outshine a mysterious plague making the fairies lose their light. After spitting into the sink and splashing water on his face, Seth headed out of the bathroom and up the attic stairs. He had just participated in a long conversation with Grandpa, Grandma, Tanu, and Dale, and he was trying to sort through all the new information so he could figure out a way to save everybody. If only he could prove that his defeating the Revenant hadn't been a fluke. The next time a secret mission became necessary, maybe they would bring him along. At the top of the stairs, he paused, leaning against the side of the doorway. The fading light of dusk glowed purple through the window of the attic playroom. Grandpa and the others had been trying to list all the possible sources of the plague. According to them, there were 4 major demons at Fablehaven. Bahamut, who was trapped in a secure prison under a hill. Alec the Glutton, who was frozen in the woods until some idiot fed him. Graulis, a very old demon who was basically hibernating. And a demon nobody had ever seen named Kirasak, who lived in a tar pit. Against his will, Seth glanced at the journals piled beside Kendra's bed. She had known about the tar pit already because of reading. Could those pages contain info Grandpa and the others might have overlooked? Probably not. And if so, they were welcome to do the reading themselves. The adults had expressed the opinion that of the 4 demons, Bahamut and Alec were currently the most dangerous because they had never agreed to the Fablehaven Treaty. Normally, all of the magical creatures admitted to Fablehaven had to pledge to abide by the treaty, which established boundaries for where they could roam and limits to how much they could harm other creatures. There were borders that Graulis and Kirasak had sworn not to cross, rules they had made binding vows not to break. Only people foolish enough to enter their domains were at serious risk from those too. But Bahamut had been at Fablehaven since before the treaty was established, and Alec had come to Fablehaven as a guest, which imposed certain automatic restraints, but left room for him to cause trouble if he gained enough power. At least, that's how Seth understood it. The important part was that the plague probably wasn't caused by any of the 4 demons. Oh, class is starting. At least not acting directly. None of them had sufficient access. There were some candidates in the dungeon, but Dale had checked and they were all still safely imprisoned. There was a hag in the swamp who had helped train Muriel, but Grandma had maintained that starting the plague was far beyond her abilities, and the others agreed. There was a poisonous bog full of evil creatures, but the boundaries were clearly defined. Same with the inhabitants of a tunnel not far from where Nero lived. Grandpa had named many other dark creatures on the preserve, but none that were strong enough in dark magic to have possibly initiated the plague. In the end, with no viable suspects, Seth had asked what creatures haunted the old Fablehaven mansion. Before responding, the adults wanted to know how he knew a creature dwelled there. He had never brought up how he had visited the manor after escaping from Alec, worried that everyone would be angry at him for choosing to go inside. He explained how he had been lost and how he had hoped that from the roof he could get some perspective regarding his location. Then he told how a mysterious whirlwind arose, chasing him from the house, leaving him shaken and terrified. Grandpa explained that they weren't sure what dwelled in the mansion. Apparently, the manor had been overthrown on Midsummer Eve more than 100 years ago. The acting caretaker at the time, Marshal Burgess, lost his life, and caretakers had been warned ever after to avoid the old manor. Whatever found a new home in the mansion, Grandpa had concluded, was something from this preserve. Even if it escaped from the poisoned bog, it should not have the power to create a plague like we're witnessing. An advantage to the treaty is that we know what creatures are here. We have them cataloged. How could any creature have remained in the mansion after Midsummer Eve? Tanu inquired. The culprit should have been forced to return to its proper dwelling once the night ended. Theoretically, any of them could remain if they managed to change the register, which appears to be what happened, Grandpa had explained. The register is used to alter certain boundaries and grant access. Patton Burgess managed to tear the treaty from the register and escape with those essential pages. Otherwise, the preserve might have fallen. The treaty now resides in the current register, but the damage done to the old manor was irreparable. So, the whirlwind wasn't the answer. The demons weren't the answer. None of the creatures at Fablehaven were apparently the answer, and yet the plague was happening. They had eventually decided to sleep on it, leaving the problem unresolved. The only decisive action taken all day was when Grandpa used the register to prohibit all fairies from entering the yard. Seth wandered to the window to gaze out at the purple evening, and jumped back when he saw a black figure silhouetted against the glowing sky. Seth jostled against the nearby telescope, embracing the expensive piece of equipment before it could topple. Then Seth turned back to the window, half expecting the figure to be gone. The figure remained, crouching, not a silhouette, a human-shaped, three-dimensional shadow. The shadow man waved at Seth. Hesitant, Seth waved back. The shadow man shook his fists as if excited, then motioned for Seth to open the window. Seth shook his head. The shadow man pointed at himself, then pointed into the room, then once again pantomimed opening the window. Seth had gotten into major trouble the previous summer for letting a creature into the house by opening that same attic window. The creature had been disguised as a baby, but turned out to be a goblin, and once inside, the treacherous intruder had let other monstrosities in. Before the night was over, Grandpa had been kidnapped, and Dale had been temporarily turned to lead. Seth had learned his lesson. This year, he had stayed in bed on Midsummer Eve. Peeking out the window had hardly been a temptation. Of course, Midsummer Eve was different from most days, being a night when the boundaries of Fablehaven were dissolved and all sorts of nightmarish monsters could come into the yard. But today was ordinary. On a regular evening, dangerous creatures should not have access to the yard in order to crouch outside Seth's window. Did that mean the Shadow Man was a friendly creature? Then again, nice creatures had become menacing lately. Maybe this Shadow Man had once been able to enter the yard, and now that he was evil, he was using that status to trick Seth. Or maybe this was whoever had started the plague. The thought made Seth shiver. It had a ring of truth to it. The inky black figure looked like a likely candidate for starting a plague that replaced light with darkness. Seth tugged the curtains shut and backed away from the window. What should he do? He had to tell somebody. Seth clomped down the attic steps and raced to his grandparents' room. The door was shut, so he banged on it. "Come in," Grandpa invited. Seth opened the door. Neither Grandpa or Grandma had changed into their nightclothes yet. "There's something outside my window?" Seth whispered hastily. "What do you mean?" Grandpa asked. "A shadow man? A living shadow in the shape of a man. He wanted me to let him in. What creatures can enter the yard besides fairies?" "Hugo and Mendigo," Grandma said, "and of course the brownies live under the yard and have access to the house. Anything else, Stan?" "Everything else is by invitation only," Grandpa said. "I let satyrs into the yard on occasion." "What if this shadow guy started the plague?" Seth speculated. "A creature we didn't know was on the preserve, some shadowy enemy who can come into the yard but not the house?" Grandpa scowled thoughtfully. "The yard has fail-safes to prevent most creatures, even surprise guests, from entering. Whatever the nature of this shadow man, not all of the rules seem to apply." "At least it couldn't enter the house," Grandma said. Grandpa started toward the door. "We had better fetch Tanu and Dale." Seth followed Grandpa and Grandma as they collected Tanu and Dale and explained the situation. They mounted the steps to the attic in a line, Grandpa in front, Seth at the rear. Moving the telescope out of the way, they gathered around the curtained window. Grandma with her crossbow, Tanu holding a potion ready. Grandpa pulled aside the curtain to reveal an empty stretch of roof barely visible in the dying twilight. Seth pushed his way forward to the glass, peering in all directions. The Shadow Man was gone. "He was here," Seth promised. "I believe you," Grandpa said. "He really was," Seth maintained. They waited, watching as Grandpa shone a flashlight through the slightly warped panes. They located no sign of an intruder. Grandpa clicked off the flashlight. "Keep the window closed tonight," Tanu admonished. "If he returns, come for me. If not, I'll search the roof in the morning." Tanu, Dale, and Grandpa left the room. Grandma waited at the top of the stairs. "You'll be all right?" she asked. "I'm not scared," Seth said. "I just hoped I'd found something useful." "You probably have," Grandma said. "Keep that window shut." "I will." "Good night, dear. You did the right thing to come and tell us." "Night." Grandma left. Seth changed into his pajamas and flopped onto the bed. He began to suspect that the Shadow Man had returned, perching outside the window. The fiend had probably not wanted the others to see him, but now if Seth peeked, he would be there, silently asking to enter. Unable to banish the suspicion, Seth went to the window and threw aside the curtain. The Shadow Man had not returned. Dragonflies. The next morning, Tanu crept around on the roof outside the window but found no trace of a visitor. Seth was unsurprised. Since when did shadows leave footprints? At breakfast, Grandpa tried to inform Seth he would be restricted to the house all day. After Seth's persistent complaining, Grandpa agreed to let him play with Mendigo in the yard if somebody supervised them from the deck. Grandpa, Grandma, Tanu, and Dale spent the day poring over journals and other books from their extensive library, trying to find any hint of something like the plague afflicting the creatures of Fablehaven. They took turns reading on the deck. Mendigo had orders to bring Seth inside at the first appearance of anything suspicious. The day passed uneventfully. Seth played football and baseball with Mendigo and went swimming in the afternoon. At lunch and dinner, Seth listened as the adults discussed how frustrated they were about the lack of any information that explained what was transpiring at Fablehaven. Grandpa had still been unable to get a call through to the Sphinx. After dinner, Seth begged his way outside for a few minutes. Hugo was there, having recently finished some chores in the barn, and Seth wanted to see what happened if Mendigo pitched to the golem. The baseball bat looked tiny, clutched in Hugo's massive hand. Seth told Hugo to hit the ball as hard as he could, then instructed Mendigo to throw a fastball right down the middle. Seth moved out of the way, worried about getting brained by a foul ball. He didn't think they would need a catcher. Mendigo hurled a blazing pitch, and Hugo, swinging one-handed, whaled the ball into the sky. Seth tried to follow the baseball as it shrank into the distance, but failed. He knew the ball had still been rising when it cleared the trees on the far side of the yard, so it had to have landed a good ways into the woods. Seth turned to Tanu, who was sitting on the deck, enjoying the sunset as he sipped herbal tea. "Can I send Mendigo to fetch it?" "Go ahead," Tanu said, "if you think the ball is worth fetching." "It might just be a pile of mush," Seth laughed. "That was quite a blast," Tanu said. Seth told Mendigo to quickly retrieve the ball, but the puppet did not respond. When Tanu repeated the command, the lumberjack dashed across the yard and into the woods. That was when Seth saw the Shadow Man coming into the yard not far from where Mendigo had entered the trees. The phantom moved toward Seth with swift, deliberate strides. Seth retreated toward the deck. "There he is," Seth told Tanu, pointing, "the Shadow Man." The Samoan stared in the direction Seth was indicating, looking perplexed. "In the trees?" he asked. "No, right there, in the yard, coming through that flower bed." Tanu stared a moment longer. "I don't see anything." "He's on the lawn now, getting close to us, walking fast." "I still don't see it," Tanu said, giving Seth a worried glance. "You think I'm crazy?" Seth asked. "I think we better get inside," Tanu said, backing toward the door. "Just because I can't see him doesn't mean you don't. Where is he now?" "Almost to the deck." Tanu motioned for Seth to follow and went in the back door. Seth entered after Tanu and they shut the door. "We have a situation," Tanu called. The others hurried into the room. "What now?" Grandpa asked. "Seth sees the Shadow Man in the yard," Tanu said. "I don't." "He's on the deck," Seth said, looking out a window by the door. "Where?" Grandpa asked. "Right there by the rocker." "Anybody else see it?" Grandma asked. "Not me," Dale said. "He's motioning for us to come outside," Seth said. Placing her hands on her hips, Grandma regarded Seth suspiciously. You're not leading us on, are you? This would be a terrible joke, Seth. The situation at Fablehaven is much too... not making this up. I would never lie about something so important. I can't imagine why you guys can't see him. Describe him, Grandpa said. Like I said last night, it looks like the shadow of a man, but three-dimensional, Seth said. There isn't much else to describe. He's holding up his left hand, pointing at it with the other hand. Oh my gosh! What? Grandma prodded. He's missing his pinky and part of his ring finger. Coulter, Grandpa said, or some form of him. Or something that wants us to believe it's some form of him, Grandma added. Grandpa strode to the door. Warn us if he moves toward me, Grandpa told Seth, cracking the door open. Leaning forward, Grandpa spoke through the opening. If you're a friend, stay where you are. He's not moving, Seth said. Are you Coulter Dixon? Grandpa asked. He nodded, Seth said. What do you want? Grandpa asked. He's motioning for us to come with him. Can you speak? He shook his head, said Seth. He's pointing at me and motioning for me to come. Seth's not going with you, Grandpa said. He's pointing at himself and then into the house, said Seth. He wants to come inside. We can't invite you in. You could be our friend, with your mind intact, simply in an altered state, or... He's giving a thumbs up and nodding, Seth interrupted. Or you could be a twisted version of Coulter with all his knowledge but sinister intentions. Grandpa closed the door and turned to the others. We can't risk letting him inside or being led into a trap. He's making a pleading gesture, Seth reported. Grandpa closed his eyes, steadying himself, then opened the door again. Help me understand what is happening, he said. You are free to roam the preserve? Thumbs up, Seth said. Even places where we normally would be unable to go, Grandpa asked. 2 thumbs up, Seth said. That one must be important. And you have found something we need to see, said Grandpa. He's shaking his hand like so-so. You can lead us to vital information, Grandpa said. 2 thumbs up. And it is urgent. The situation is dire? Thumbs up. What if I only come? Grandpa offered. Thumbs down, said Seth. Seth has to come, Grandpa asked. Thumbs up. Could Tanu and I come with Seth? Grandpa asked. He's shrugging, Seth said. You don't know. Can you find out? Grandpa asked. Thumbs up, said Seth. Go find out if we can come. I can't send Seth with you alone. I hope you understand. And none of us can accompany you until we can confirm that you are not an evil version of yourself seeking to betray us. Give us some time to deliberate. Can you come back in the morning? He's shaking his head, Seth relayed. He's pantomiming a ball. Now he's shielding his eyes. I think he means he can't go out in the sunlight. Yep, he heard me. He's giving a thumbs up. Tomorrow evening, then, Grandpa said. Thumbs up, said Seth. Try to think of a way to prove we can trust you, said Grandpa. He's tapping a finger on the side of his head like he'll think about it. Now he's walking away. Grandpa closed the door. I can't foresee a way to prove he's the same Coulter we love and trust. He could have all of Coulter's knowledge, yet still be a threat. Why can't he come into the house on his own? Dale asked. I think he could if we left the door open, Tanu said. He's insubstantial right now, not material enough to pass through a door. Not immaterial enough to pass through a door, but he can't open one on his own. How do we confirm he's on our side? Seth asked. Your grandfather may be right, Grandma said. I'm not sure there is a way. The situation is dire enough that if he would let me go with him, I would simply take the risk, Grandpa said. But I'll not let Seth do it. I'll take the risk, Seth said. I'm not afraid. Why is he insisting Seth comes? Dale asked. Only Seth can see him, Tanu said. Of course, Grandpa said. No wonder he was adamant that we couldn't come without Seth. I was too busy trying to find a deeper purpose in it. Still, Grandma said, he was hesitant to allow others to join Seth. Why could it be that only Seth can see him? Nobody ventured a guess. You're sure you aren't making fools of us? Grandma asked Seth again, studying him shrewdly. I promise, Seth said. This isn't a trick to get out of the house and into the woods, Grandma pressed. Trust me, said Seth. If all I wanted was to get into the woods, I'd already be there. I swear I would never make up a story like this, and I have no idea why only I can see him." "I believe you, Seth," Grandpa said, "but I don't like any of this. I wonder if our shadowy Coulter could reveal himself to more of us if he wanted. Could he be choosing to let only Seth see him? We need to do all we can to make sense of this. Unanswerable questions are piling up. I propose we speak with Vanessa again. If she can be of any service, now is the time to call upon her. Perhaps in her work for our enemies, she has witnessed something like this Shadow Man phenomenon." "She's not a cure-all," Grandma said. "Odds are, all she'll be able to do is imitate the same guessing we're making." "Oh, our guesses aren't adding up to much," Grandpa said. "Time could be running out. We should at least check." "I'll go in the box if it'll speed things up," Dale volunteered, "as long as you let me out." "She will be going back inside," Grandma promised. Grandma got her crossbow, and Grandpa grabbed a flashlight. Tanu went to retrieve his handcuffs, but returned empty-handed. "Anybody seen my handcuffs? All I can find are the keys." "Did you ever take them off of her?" Grandma asked. Something about the way she asked the question hinted that she already knew the answer. They descended the steps to the basement. When they reached the quiet box, Dale opened the door and stepped inside. Grandma closed the door, the quiet box rotated, and when she opened it, Vanessa stood there with her wrists cuffed together. "Thanks for leaving me shackled," she said, stepping out of the box, as if I didn't already feel like a part of a cheap magic act. "What's the latest?" "Coulter is in some sort of darkened, shadowy state," Grandpa said. "He can't speak. He seems to want to share information with us, but we don't know if we can trust him." "Neither do I," Vanessa said. "Have you any guesses how the plague originated?" "Do you?" Grandma responded, her tone accusatory. "I've had some time to mull it over. What have you come up with?" "Honestly, we can't fathom how it could have originated here," Grandpa said. "Bahamut is imprisoned, Alec is frozen, the other major demons are bound by the treaty. We can't think of any being at Fablehaven with the ability to initiate something like this." As he spoke, a smile appeared on Vanessa's lips, gradually widening. "And the obvious conclusion hasn't occurred to any of you?" "That it came from outside of Fablehaven," Grandma guessed. "Not necessarily," Vanessa said. "I have a different possibility in mind, but I don't want to go back in the box." "There is no way for you to undo the connection you forged when you bit us?" Grandpa asked. "I could lie and say there was," Vanessa said. "You know the link is permanent. I would be happy to take an oath never to use the connections again." "We know what your word is worth," Grandpa said. "Considering that the Sphinx is now more my enemy than yours, you can rely on me much more than you know. I'm enough of an opportunist to recognize when the time has come to trade sides. And to recognize when you can commit a large enough betrayal for the Sphinx to welcome you back," Grandma said. "Or perhaps the Sphinx really is on our side, and whoever employs you would be glad for your return as soon as you manage to slip away." "Makes it complicated," Vanessa admitted. "Vanessa," Grandpa said, "if you don't help us rescue Fablehaven, you might be stuck in that box for the rest of eternity." "No prison lasts forever," Vanessa said. "Besides, as blind as you seem, sooner or later you'll arrive at the same conclusion I did." "Let's make it sooner," Grandpa said, raising his voice for the first time. "I'm on the verge of deciding the quiet box is too good for you. I could arrange a stay in the Hall of Dread. Your ability to haunt our sleep wouldn't remain a concern for long." Vanessa paled. Seth did not know too much about the Hall of Dread. He knew it was on the other side of the dungeon behind a blood-red door, and that the prisoners there required no food. Apparently, Vanessa knew more details than he did. "I'll tell you," Vanessa relented. "Granted, I'd rather go to the Hall of Dread than give away the key knowledge that might buy my freedom, but this is not that information. Nor does it get you much closer to comprehending how the plague began, although it sheds some light on whom to blame. Are you sure the Sphinx took the previous occupant of the quiet box off the preserve with him?" "We watched them drive away," Grandma's voice trailed off. "Did you observe them from all angles the entire time?" Vanessa pursued. "Is it possible the Sphinx might have released the prisoner before passing through the gate?" Grandma and Grandpa looked at each other. Then Grandpa looked at Vanessa. "We watched them depart, but not closely enough to guarantee you're wrong. Your theory is plausible." Given the circumstances, Vanessa said, I'd say probable. There is no other explanation. The thought of that secret prisoner bundled in burlap roaming the preserve, turning Nipsies and fairies dark, made Seth shudder. He had to admit it was the most likely proposition they had considered. What do you know about the prisoner? Grandma asked Vanessa. No more than you, Vanessa said. I have no clue who the prisoner was, or how he or she or it started the plague. But the process of elimination sure makes the prisoner look like the culprit, and it definitely doesn't reflect well on the Sphinx. You're right. We should have seen this possibility, Grandpa said. I wonder if, deep down, I still haven't come to terms with the reality that the Sphinx might be our greatest enemy. This is still all conjecture, Grandma reminded them, although without much conviction. Have you any other information that might help us? Grandpa inquired. Not with solving the mystery of this plague, Vanessa said. I would need time to study it firsthand. If you let me help, I'm sure I could be of service. We're short-handed enough without having to stand guard over you, Grandpa replied. Fine, Vanessa said. Could you take the shackles with you this time? Tanu unlocked and removed the handcuffs. Vanessa stepped back into the box. She winked at Seth. He stuck out his tongue. Grandma closed the door, the box rotated, and Dale emerged. I was starting to worry this was all an elaborate setup to get rid of me, Dale said, shaking his arms as if clearing off invisible cobwebs. Did it feel like a long time? Seth asked. Long enough, Dale answered. You lose your senses in there. Can't hear a thing, can't see a thing, can't smell a thing. You start losing all sensation. You feel like a disembodied mind. It's almost relaxing, but not in a good way. You start losing your grip of who you are. I can't figure out how Vanessa manages to string words into sentences after spending weeks in that emptiness. I'm not sure anything could put her at a loss for words, Grandma said. She's as slippery as they come. Whatever we do, we must place no trust in her. No trust, Grandpa said, but she may be of further use for information. She acts like she still has a card to play, and she's no fool. So she probably does. How can we discover the identity of the hooded prisoner? Could Nero have seen something in his stone? Grandma asked. Possibly, Grandpa said. If not, there's a chance he still could. I'll go ask him, Seth offered. His previous visit with the cliff troll had been exciting. The greedy troll had wanted to acquire him as a servant in exchange for using a seeing stone to locate Grandpa. You'll do nothing of the kind, Grandma said. A massage enticed him into helping us once. The same offer might tempt him again. Knowing Nero, having sampled your skills once, he'll want you to sign on as his permanent masseuse before he'll assist us, Grandpa said. Last time, he had never had a massage. The novelty of it was the key. You proved that curiosity will motivate him more than riches. A special potion, perhaps? Tanu suggested. Something modern? Seth tried, like a cell phone or a camera? Grandpa put his hands together against his lips as if praying. It's hard to say what might do the trick, but something along those lines is worth a try. With creatures transformed by the plague lurking about, simply getting to Nero might be the hardest part. What if Nero has been affected by the plague? Dale wondered. If it turns light creatures dark, it might turn dark creatures darker, Tanu speculated. Maybe we'd have better luck following Coulter, Seth reminded them. We won't be able to answer those questions until we make a choice and take a risk, Grandpa said. Let's sleep on it and decide tomorrow. And that's the end of the chapter. The whole chapter, you guys. How exciting. Things are getting super fun. Oh my gosh. Hey, it's our song. Class is starting. I hope you're having a great day, guys. I will see you next time.